Well, welcome, Jeff Deuble, to Restitutio. So glad to have you back on the show today.
Well, thank you, Sean. It's always a pleasure to be with you too.
Now, our last time together, we were talking about your life story and what you had been through in your quest to discover the biblical Jesus, the Jesus before church tradition got a hold of him. And you, at the very end of that interview, mentioned a book that you were writing or had written. And I'm excited to say that that book is now a reality. So let's let's talk about the book. What inspired you to write this book, Christ Before Creeds?
Yeah, Sean. Well, when I said book in our last interview, it was a very rough draft manuscript, and it's taken quite a journey since then. But there was quite a backstory that people can listen to from that last interview. But it ended with me as senior pastor of my church having to step down or choosing to step down. And in that process, it all happened very quickly. There was no real opportunity to be able to explain to the members of my church my position, my doctrinal sort of position, and why I had come to that place. And there was a lot of curiosity. People were asking me, what's this all about? And so really I sat down and wrote a little bit cathartically, but I wanted to put into words my position and why I had come to that place, and wanted to present it in a way that was kind of understandable and clear to just the average person in the pew, so that I could say, look, if you want to understand more, read this, and you'll get an understanding.
So it was to give an explanation for why you thought what you thought in a way that regular people could understand. You didn't need a degree from a theology school to follow your reasoning on this.
Yeah, absolutely. It was to make it accessible. It was to try to make it fairly, clear, something that can be quite complex and confusing. So I wanted to try to present it in a way that was, a bit understandable just to, the average person in the pew.
All right, well, tell us a little bit about the writing process. What were some of the ideas you grappled with as you wrote the book?
Well, one of the things that I grappled with was that this was a big issue for me. This was really important. It kind of turned my theological world upside down. And I mean, there was a lot of implications in terms of my ministry, my family. And so this was a big deal for me, but I realized that it's not a big deal for many people. I mean, most Christians either are happy to accept what they've been taught, and orthodoxy as they understand it in terms of Jesus, in terms of how they understand God. And it's either that they're happy to accept it, or that it's just so confusing and so complicated and so confronting that they just don't want to go there. So the first thing I had to realize is that, people aren't necessarily nearly as motivated as I am in terms of trying to explore and understand this issue. So that was the first thing. And another thing I really grappled with, and in fact, to be honest, I was quite conflicted about the book, because I've seen the damage that debate and discussion around this issue can cause. I mean, I saw my own church of 300 or so members just unravel and implode. That wasn't all because of the issue. It was more about how it was handled. But I've seen, the difficulty it can cause for people in their individual faith. It causes a crisis. within them. I've seen disunity, division, dissension within the church. I've just seen I guess the other thing, Sean, is that people can get obsessed and can fixate on this. And so that becomes something that distracts them and distracts the church from what we really should be on about. So we so easily lose the plot. We so really easily kind of get away from our core business, the mission of the church, the cause of Christ, the kingdom of God. And we just get distracted into these kind of debates. And that certainly happened in the 4th and 5th centuries, where this was the bone of contention. There was so much disunity caused. There was so much dishonoring of Christ. And so I recognized all of that. So I wanted to write the book in a way that tried to, sort of circumvent or get around that. I tried to write a book that wouldn't cause division, but rather build bridges, and to try to promote unity rather than disunity, and try to write in a way that would not cause so much difficulty, but rather advance the cause of Christ.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that you're a healer, not somebody that's looking to do damage to the body of Christ. You want to heal the body of Christ. And you want to build, not tear down. But there is a component here that requires, if I could use the analogy of a broken bone, that if you have a broken bone, like you break your arm, and then you let it heal naturally without setting it first. Now, you have an arm, it still exists. It's very weak. It may hurt, throb, or not be able to do what it used to be able to do. But really the only way to fix that is to then break it again, to do that surgery on the bone and then set it straight. And then it will heal, and it will be even better than it was before. And that analogy just came to mind while you were speaking there, because there is a trauma that you must go through to redefine something this important, like Jesus. Like, who is Jesus is a big question, right? Yes. So it is very much like breaking a bone that you believe, and I agree with you, was not set correctly in the 4th century when the church went into this whole subject very deeply, and really has floundered as a result of this in relating to Jesus and understanding his words and his teachings. So I hear what you're saying. You realize that people are potentially going to be upset by the book, but it's not intended to divide. It's not intended to tear down. It's intended to help the body of Christ to restore back to what it was originally. Now, many of us already have other one God books similar to this on our bookshelves. I've got a bunch on my bookshelf. Why do you think we need another one on who the genuine Jesus is? What is unique, I guess, about your approach and what you have done here that warrants those of us who are already with you doctrinally? Why should we buy this?
Well, with all of the books on your shelf, Sean, you probably wouldn't buy my book for its theological content. You've probably got more than enough theological content, in your library and many others in their libraries. Although I do think I state some things a bit more succinctly than in most books. And I do think I make a few unique theological points, but it wouldn't be for the theological content. I think it'd be a couple of reasons why this would be a very valuable and useful addition. First of all, because of the intended audience. As I said, this is not an academic treatise. I do believe it does have biblical and theological integrity, but it's not meant for an academic audience. It's really aimed at just, the average person in the pew some who have a fairly reasonable biblical knowledge, but many have just a very basic knowledge. So it doesn't make a lot of assumptions that many books do. So it's the kind of book that you can, give to someone who's maybe interested, or that, the conversation crops up and you say, hey, look, I've got a book that I think would be really helpful. So this would be a good introductory book that would really, I think, help people to begin the journey who were seeking. And so I think that's it. And secondly, I think the style. As I said, I didn't write the book to win the argument or to win an argument or to try to, convert. It was more to impart awareness and understanding. Because I think for me, at least, it's just that I was brought up in a Trinitarian sort of teaching, and I was totally unaware of the whole other side of the argument. There's a whole lot of information I just had been totally unaware of. So it's to really impart awareness and information. It's to, as I said, to build bridges and to start a conversation. It's really to try to help people become curious and begin a journey of exploration.
Yeah. And I think that's a valuable niche behind this, this particular approach you have. The book itself is also short, which lends itself to giving it to people and to using it as an evangelism tool. And, the tone of the book in particular is very friendly. Which is great. Sometimes the tone of the book is so excessively neutral and scientific almost that it's just doesn't really grab your attention. And other times the tone of a book like this will be so combative that there'll be just no chance anyone would ever want to read it through. So I commend you on your tone. I also was thinking about this cover design here. And this very Middle Eastern looking Jesus. So many times we see a Jesus picture, and it's a little bit too European. And so I was just going to ask you about this design and this picture here, where you've got half of the face covered with words. Could you share a little bit about that and where you're coming from and what this cover represents?
Yeah, sure, Sean. And yeah, look, you're right. I mean, the book is intentionally a short book, and it is, not adversarial or polemic in style. It is very much a conversational style. But in terms of the cover, it is meant to be something that kind of grabs people's attention. It's a little bit arresting and symbolically shows that, there is a human Jesus behind all of the verbiage and the philosophical, sort of interpretations that kind of cloud who he is. And
so all those words on the right side of the cover.
Yeah, that's right.
So other interpretations that overshadow and
yes. Exactly.
They separate us from the true Jesus.
And the guy on the cover, actually, his name's Ali, and he has an Islamic sort of agnostic background, and I got to know him through my son's church, and we have a great friendship and relationship. But he was on a spiritual journey, and he allowed me to take his photo for the cover of the book. And
so you actually know this guy. Wow.
Yeah, I do. And his wife became a Christian about 3 weeks prior to that. And he committed his life to Christ 2 days after that photo.
Wow. So the book is already winning converts, even when they don't read it. They just that's just a tremendous story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about your background a little bit as a minister within the Churches of Christ, also called the Stone Campbell movement or Restoration movement. This is a movement begun by Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell. And, I myself have read Barton Stone's autobiography, which I highly recommend. It's a great book, but there is actually a part in that book where Stone talks about how nervous he was about his ordination because he didn't really understand or believe in the Trinity. And he confessed his reservations to one of the leaders there. And the leader said, "Oh, don't worry. We're not going to ask you any questions about that. You'll be fine." It's kind of an arresting moment in the book. By all accounts, neither Stone nor Campbell were quote unquote orthodox in their Christologies and their view of Christ and the Trinity and so on. And, there are these other movements that came out in the 19th century from America too, with other founders of one God groups, like the Christadelphians with John Thomas and the Church of God with Joseph Marsh and Benjamin Wilson and some of these others. So my question is, what do you think is so common throughout the Church of Christ history as far as this tendency to ask this question and to say, well, maybe we got this wrong, because it's just sort of like in the water right from the beginning.
Mm. Yeah, well, I think it's just the ethos or the foundational principles of that movement that naturally allow people the freedom to just get back to the scriptures, just to get back to basic, essential, uncluttered Christianity based on the authority of the scriptures alone. So it just gives you that freedom to explore and come to your own opinions. And also, it's a tradition that tries to, as I say, take away the traditions of the church and just get back to the basics, which I think, is a really great place to be at. And we had catch cries like "No creed but Christ," which meant that, sure, people can have their opinions and their formulations, their conclusions as they read the scriptures, but let's not make that binding on other people. Let's allow people freedom to come to their own individual conclusions, which may be very different. And there was another catch cry that was "In essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, love." In other words, look, there are some non-essentials that we hold to as foundational, but outside of those, we can allow people to come to their own individual conclusions and still remain united. We don't have to divide over just different opinions on all those non-essential issues. Because at the time, the church was splintering over, every different opinion. And they said, no, that's not what Jesus wanted for the church.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that heritage. And as somebody who didn't grow up in the movement, just the mindset of the movement is something that's really grabbed me. And I do self-identify as a restorationist. And of course, my podcast that we're on right now is just the Latin word for restoration. The English word for restoration was already taken. So what was I going to do? So I picked the Latin word. I think the Greek word was a little bit difficult to pronounce. So we went with Latin. And so that's where restitutio came from. But it's really the same mindset. And it's not only Churches of Christ and this ministry here, but lots of different Christian ministries over the centuries have said this. They've said, let's get back to the Bible. Let's get back to the time before tradition developed into the complexities that we see today. And to a large degree, that's what Martin Luther was doing, right? And so this is very much, I think, within the mainstream of Christianity, this impulse that some of us have to say, well, maybe we're off track. Let's go and see. And of course, it's not hard to go and see because we do have the Bible so well preserved over so many centuries that we can peer right into the first centuries. It's just miraculous. It's just like looking through a window into that period of time. And the question is, what do we see there? Who is the Jesus that we encounter there? And it doesn't look like the stained glass Jesus of so many churches today. But I did really appreciate how you concluded your book. I just read from the final pages here. You wrote, "My plea is to rediscover the Jesus of the Bible, to remove the overlays of subsequent Greek philosophical thinking and ecclesiological traditions that deified and mystified him, to return to a more genuine and Jewish Jesus, a more historic, holistic, and human Jesus, a less creedal and more credible Jesus, as truly portrayed in the scriptures." So that's the project, right? I mean, if you do that and you peel back those layers of tradition, you go back to that Jewish, that Jesus of the scriptures, then that is the real Jesus. Now, there are people who are going to disagree with you on this, and the question is that the tendency is that Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians will talk past each other. How does this book help Christians engage with each other in a more meaningful way?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, Sean. You know, that we often talk past each other. And I think we need to realise that Trinitarians, many of them, will remain Trinitarians irrespective of what arguments we might make, as valid and as valid as we think that they are. For all sorts of reasons, many Trinitarians will not change their views for lots of reasons. And of course, many biblical Unitarians will not change their mind because they've come to those convictions as they've read the scriptures. And so the question is, what do you do with that? And this book seeks not sort of an us versus them mentality, but let's get back to the basics. Let's get back to Peter's confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, which, Jesus said the Father had revealed to him and would be the foundation of the church. So we can agree on that. So, we might differ on some other things, but the foundation remains the same. And so let's walk hand in hand, even if we don't see eye to eye. Let's talk about this with respect and humility. And, even if we can't come to the same conclusion, let's at least, deal with each other as brothers and sisters in Christ, based on that foundation.
Yeah, I really appreciate the H word there, humility. I think us being willing to say we could be wrong. To me, that's intellectual humility. That's doctrinal humility. If we desire someone else to change their beliefs, right, and we're not willing to change our beliefs, there's a hypocrisy there, right? There's a double standard where I'm right and you must change. Well, who's to say that I'm the one that's right? I could be the one that's wrong and the other person could be right. And I think if we have that, if we can model that, which I think the book does, it models this willingness to change, because I mean, you've lost so much in the process of pursuing the Christ who is before creeds, both in priority and in time, that you've demonstrated a humility to change, a willingness to change. And, that really does come through in the book, although you have to read towards the end to find out a little bit about your personal story. I think you kind of wanted to save that till later in the book. But let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite section in the book that you particularly enjoyed or you thought came out really well?
That's a little bit like asking, a kid what's his favorite chocolate, I think, Sean. I like different parts of the book because of what each achieves. I think the first, 3 or 4 chapters help deal with people's assumptions and prejudices. It deals with some of the attitudinal stuff that many books don't. And it helps in that process, I think, of deconstruction that you mentioned about breaking the bones so it can mend. It just helps to deconstruct some things, hopefully so then people become a little bit more open and teachable for another point of view. So I like the first chapters for that reason. And then I like the next couple of chapters because it puts in a fairly clear and concise way, I think, what the Bible actually teaches about who Jesus is, in a way that's not theological, in a way that's not philosophical, but more just based on biblical exegesis. And then the last chapter is seeking a conciliatory approach and saying, okay, whatever may be the conclusions that you have come to, given the evidence that's been presented, wherever you may end up, what's the way forward? Whether you're convinced or not convinced or still wanting to explore further, how do we still continue the conversation and continue the journey in a way that's going to be helpful? So look, I'm happy with the whole book, actually.
That's the right answer. Ding, ding, ding. If you said, well, I just like chapter 3, the rest is just kind of boring, then we might have reason to question it. But yeah, that sounds great. And, I really do appreciate the spirit, especially of chapter 7, which I think a lot of people will look at your first 6 chapters who have already come to see this understanding, and they will say, well, all right, yeah, maybe you put it a little differently, but you're basically saying the same thing. And then they'll get to chapter 7, and I think they will receive a challenge there, because you really do challenge both sides. You challenge non-Trinitarians, you challenge Trinitarians, you challenge oneness people, and you're saying, look, hey guys, Christ first, right? So like, if you believe in Jesus, that he's Messiah, that he died for your sins, like we're going to put that ahead of these other ideas of whether he pre-existed or not, whether he's co-equal with God, and so on, whether he has a human and divine nature, some of these other subjects that the book gets into. But I think that's going to be great. But then on the other side, for people who are not familiar with this, people who are coming from a more traditional mainstream mindset, those early chapters really do lay such groundwork, but also in a challenging way. So I think the book is really, really good for both sides. Now, talk to me about who has supported the book or spoken for it, as far as scholars or pastors or churches. Did you want to mention anybody there specifically?
Yeah. Look, thanks, Sean. Yeah, look, there are some people, but it's interesting that, when you say that last chapter, which I think, is most, I'm trying to strike a balance between grace and truth. We know Jesus was full of grace and truth, and I've been trying to strike that balance in this book. But I think that's been the chapter that's caused, the most pushback, particularly by some Unitarians who say, yeah, the arguments are great, but, I think, you've let the argument sort of undermined a bit. But so anyway, it's an interesting one, sort of keeping that balance between grace and truth. But so there's been some. I've had some feedback. The manuscript's been read by a number of people. Well, by yourself, Sean, and I know a number of your peers who are church leaders and, even lecturers and theologians. So it's been great to get their feedback. Particularly Dale Tuggy gave very comprehensive feedback and particularly address some of the nuances of the theological debate that I, probably had not quite grasped. So that was great. Richard Rubinstein, of course, gave, affirmation on the historical aspects of it. I got some just normal people in, if I can, some average Christians to read it, and
well, those are the people you're trying to reach, right?
Yeah, that's right. I wanted to make sure they could understand it, and it made sense to them. But also, I gave it to some Trinitarians, who, for example, the ex-principal of the Churches of Christ College in Australia. I gave it to him, and another friend of mine who's solidly Trinitarian, and just wanted to make sure that I had, represented them okay, and that, just to get their feedback as well. And so it's had a variety of, it's been road tested, I guess, Sean, and so that's been good.
What I love about that is that in being involved with this book, how long have we been working on this, Jeff?
It's been a fair while. It took a long time.
The publishing side of it, not the writing side, but the publishing side. When did we start on this? Was like a year ago?
Yeah, I'd say so. Yes.
Yeah. So I've been involved on the publishing side of this. Of course, the fabulous Anna Brown has done the lion's share of the leading of this team to get it done. But what I appreciate about it, Jeff, is that you're not a solo act. You're not one of these mavericks that's out there that just is convinced that God's speaking in your ear and nobody else knows anything, and you're gonna straighten everything out. You're much more of a community-minded man than that, and that's really come through in this process. That it has been a lot of there has been a lot of feedback, and I encourage you who are either watching or listening to this, that you who are listening to this, you would get the book. And if you are somebody who has not come to, if you're somebody who believes in the Trinity, or somebody who believes in oneness theology, that you would start from the beginning. But if you're somebody that already believes that the Father is the only true God and that Jesus is his human Messiah, skip to chapter 7. Skip to chapter 7 and see what you think, because that's the juicy part, I think, that really demands our attention. And that's a real big question for the movement in general, Jeff. What kind of movement are we all going to be a part of? Is it going to be the kind of movement that pounds the pulpit and says, if you don't believe this, you're going to hell? Or is it going to be more the style of Jesus, who, was no pushover, but at the same time was easy to entreat? Sinners wanted to have him over for dinner. Look, if you're just going to shout and yell at people and tell them they're doomed, nobody's going to invite you over for dinner, right? Or at least not twice, maybe just once. But I do really think that you struck that balance between grace and truth well there in chapter 7, and that we can extend Christian love to people, and these others who have supported the book and who have endorsed it, from so many different groups, from Asians to Americans to Australians and others, that there would be this support, really indicates that I think you're onto something here. Now let's talk about evangelism. In your book, you point out some of the challenges the Trinity idea poses for evangelism. Talk a little bit more about that. What problems would we face if we did have a Trinitarian view of Jesus?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's particularly two groups that it causes some difficulty for. Number one is people who have a strong monotheistic faith, such as Jewish or Islamic adherents. For them, the Trinity is a real stumbling block, because even though Trinitarians say, well, it's only one God, that doesn't really kind of ring true for people who are monotheistic. They can't get their head around, well, there's actually three persons in this one God. So isn't that just tritheism in denial? That's not real monotheism. So it causes that initial barrier for monotheistic believers, such as Jews and Islamic people. And then secondly, I think it causes also some stumbling blocks for people who don't have a church background, who may be agnostic or just, undecided about things, and they have a fairly rationalistic approach. It needs, if Christianity is valid, it needs to make sense. And because the Trinity is basically a bit of a contradiction, it doesn't really make sense, then that in itself is an issue. I've got a member of my extended family who just, finds that it's it just doesn't make sense. And therefore, it's just a bit of an unnecessary and unfortunate barrier that doesn't need to be there in our evangelism. I think it just creates, unfortunate barriers.
Yeah. I was thinking about the saying, if you try to understand the Trinity, you lose your mind. If you don't believe the Trinity, you lose your soul. And just how this is so at odds with what we see elsewhere in Scripture, that there's not this central paradox or contradiction, whatever you want to call it, at the heart of everything, that we have to sort of like just mentally cross our eyes and say, I don't know. Jesus doesn't talk to people like that. He doesn't say, hey, it's so far beyond you, you just got to trust me. No, he says, look at my words, look at my works, and believe because of what you see, of what you hear. And believe that the Father has sent him. It's interesting, Jesus never said you must believe in the Trinity. Or the apostles, upon reflecting on what Jesus had done and Jesus's exalted role at the right hand of God, there's no statement I can find in Paul's epistles where he says you must believe in the Trinity. I do see that in the later 4th century. But why did it take 300 years? That's a good question. So we need to get back to the Christ before the creeds. What about the style? It seemed like you went for a simpler style of writing, and based on that, probably not so much based on that one sentence I read where you used the word ecclesiological, but generally speaking, you really do approach it from a very simple, easy to understand approach. And that's actually not very common for this topic, because, even just to describe the idea of the Trinity requires so much philosophical terminology, like the whole idea of ousia and homoousia, and the hypostasis, and the hypostatic union. It goes on and on, the procession of the Spirit and the eternal generation of the Son. There's just so many of these different phrases and ideas, really. So how did you try to keep your readers from getting too bogged down with those kinds of nerdy details?
That was one of the biggest struggles in writing, because it's so easy, or it's so difficult to know how much detail to get into, and it's very easy to kind of get burrowed down into some of that theological debating stuff. So I sought to try to just have a bit more of an overview, just kind of hitting the salient points of both the history and the theology, and try to resist getting bogged down into detail there. So that was one thing that I did, and it was a struggle, because it's so easy, it's trying to strike the balance. You need to give enough information for people to be able to appreciate what you're saying and to deal with some of the things, but then not get too technical. So what I did was some of the more technical arguments and some of the passages that are very difficult to deal with in a cursory sort of way, I did touch upon them in the main text, but I put a lot of that material into an appendix at the end of the book, so that if people did want to get into some more detail and to explore further into some of those passages, then they could do that later. And the other thing I did is that I invited people to engage with the book at 3 different levels. You know, if they just wanted to kind of get to, they could review it. They could just kind of, if they just wanted to get to the bottom line, so to speak, and just get to the conclusions and the summation, then I put a summary at the end of each chapter and said, just read the summary for the first 5 chapters, and then all of chapter 6 and all of chapter 7, and you'll basically get the guts of the book. Or you can read the whole thing through from start to finish, so you get to understand the reasoning for the conclusions. And then also there are footnotes, and there's the appendix, and there's further resources at the end if you want to research it further. So that's kind of how I got around it.
Very good. Very good. And of course, the book is available on Amazon, both in Australia and the United States. So that's good. But actually, I just saw a bloke who lives in Northern Ireland just got his copy. So I think it's available in Europe as well. So that's good news for the book. Really, publishing has come such a long way in the last even 5 years. Actually, when we started this project, Amazon was not yet publishing in Australia. We were going to work through a different company, and halfway through, Amazon opened a printer in Australia. So is that not God's providence on this project? You know, that this book needed to get printed and needed to get accessible to English readers all over the world. You know, I think this is really going to have such an impact. And of course, there's the Kindle version for you e-reader types, that if you prefer that, you can get the Kindle version. But let me just conclude here, Jeff, as we're winding down our conversation. What's next for you? You've written this book, you've done so much here, and I think we'll be promoting this, but like what's on the horizon for you? Any ideas?
By the way, thanks for saying bloke. Did you throw that in for my sake?
Well, you know, when speaking to an Australian, you try to, you know, speak a little down under. Sure. You know, a lot of your slang is a mystery to me. I have no idea what it means. But at least I know that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Australians will appreciate it. Good question, Sean. I don't really know exactly what's ahead for me. As you know, there'll be a web page that will be linked to the book, and I might use that, and also blog and other things to continue conversing and talking with people who have questions or who think that I've got it wrong somewhere. I'm more than happy for people to feedback to me, and so I'm happy to continue the conversation that the book will generate in that format. But also, I'd like to go beyond that. I don't want to be seen as just kind of a one issue, single issue, one dimensional sort of guy.
Yeah.
I guess, Sean, I'm not a theologian. I'm a pastor, really, at heart. And for me, sure, I'm happy to discuss and debate about Jesus. But for me, that's really just a step towards knowing and understanding who Jesus really is, so that we can follow him, and so that ultimately we can become more like him. And that's really my heart. And so I'd like to maybe, extend beyond just and pursue that aspect of it as well.
And you are currently pastoring a church, right?
Yeah, pastoring a church. Plus also I'm working part-time as a chaplain in the Defence Force, the Australian Defence Force.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for speaking with me today. I'm real excited about Christ Before Creeds, excited to see people reading this. To be honest, I'm much more excited to see people who disagree with me reading this book than people that agree with me reading this book, because I think it really does have the potential to maybe not change somebody's mind instantly, but raise the right questions. Because anybody that changes their mind instantly, they probably didn't have a strong view. But if you raise the right questions, then the person will start doing the research. They'll go to the websites, they'll go to the library, they'll go to Amazon, they'll get the books, they'll go to the Facebook groups, the forums, or whatever kind of research they do. They'll talk to their, scholarly friends. And then once the right questions are in mind, that can really help to get somebody started on a quest, like you got started on a quest. So I really just appreciate you doing this book, and just want to thank you for your time in coming on Restitutio today.
And thank you, Sean. It's always a pleasure. And can I just also say a very big thank you, because you picked up that comment in the last podcast, and you read it, and you believed in the importance of the book, and you've supported it personally. And so I just want to say a very big thank you to yourself as well.
Thank you.